How we use and develop AI is going to be the defining choice of our generation. So, and that is a question that's related to power, it's related to institutions, it's related to ideology. I think all of these issues become really completely supercharged in the presence of AI.
Yeah. And I can imagine complications ahead if we if we do want to remedy some of the possible problems generated by AI just in the job market alone. One is you said one thing that matters is distribution of power. And we just established that income inequality has been growing for decades, and hence inequality of power has, in some respects, been growing. There's that. There's also the fact that a thing that has kind of plagued labor unions generally for some decades now, which is that a certain amount of work, leave aside automation, it is also outsourceable globally
Yeah,
across international lines.
absolutely.
So auto workers, GM says, look, if we pay you more, Japan will, out, you won't have any job at all. All the cars will
Absolutely.
be Japanese. Um, so am I right, first of all, in thinking those are two of the big challenges?
Absolutely. But, labor unions have been in decline in the United States for even longer than 1980.
Uh-huh.
Some of it is because as an economy gets richer, the composition of spending shifts towards services, and service jobs are generally less unionized than blue collar factory jobs. So
Hmm.
there's been a tendency towards that. Second, there have been very important political changes. So Reagan's one of the very first acts was the firing of the professional air traffic controllers who were striking, which was a symbolic event. And at least according to some academic accounts and observers, that was a turning point in making companies bolder in terms of taking a harder line against unions that made demands or threatened strikes. So it put another sort of nail in the coffin of labor unions as they used to be in the 50s and the 60s. And then globalization and offshoring. So the automation trend is not unrelated to Japanese competition that started in the 70s. Many companies felt we need to cut costs because we are not
Hmm.
competitive against unions, and
Hmm.
that meant sometimes suppress wage growth. But oftentimes it meant just let's get rid of workers by automating certain tasks. And then, you have the Chinese competition after the 70s and 80s, even more powerful than Japanese competition. Uh, and offshoring is a very important part of it as well. Absolutely.
Hmm. And I guess, maybe ironically, but you said that traditionally service jobs hadn't tended to be unionized. Now there's a certain kind of service job that is, in principle, the most readily unionizable. In other words, the kind of thing where you're doing a service for someone in person physically. You may be a custodian, you may be a plumber. Services performed not online are ones where, in principle, you could go on strike and they can't claim that you're going to be out competed by somebody in Japan. Um, the and I guess some of those kinds of jobs may be the last to succumb to automation if we imagine a world in which all jobs ultimately succumb, right? Like, because it seems like this round of I mean, there was a kind of big scare about what robots would do to the job market, and I don't. Well, I guess maybe you you certainly know more than I do about how much impact they've ultimately had. But it seems like generative AI is going to go not for the factory worker, but going to go fundamentally for the white collar worker, the knowledge worker, and so on. Right?
Well, I think it's at a high level, you are right. But let me sort of say a few more things. First of all, you're absolutely right. Robots did automate a lot of jobs. But if you look
Yeah.
at them numerically, it's not like huge. It's not like 10% of the US labor force. Probably it's like 1 to 2% of the US labor force that were automated by robots and associated technologies. I expect generative AI to be equally slow in terms of its automation. So, I view statements that within 10 years, 80% of jobs are going to be automated. Those are complete hype and beyond the possible. Moreover, you also hear very often that generative AI is going to go after knowledge workers. It certainly has that capability, but what we have seen with previous AI technologies, for example, in the late 2010s, is that it automates some broadly white-collar jobs, but at the lower end of the skill distribution. So it's, routine IT jobs or routine document preparation. And there are very good reasons for that. One is, again, related to hype. Achievements of some of these large language models are impressive, but still they cannot do most of the things that humans do. Second, of course, it is the more powerful managerial workers who decide what is to be automated, and they don't choose the automation of their own jobs. So again, power matters there. And then finally, look, most of the jobs that we do are not monolithic. They have a lot of different skills in them. And social skills are very important for many office jobs as well. And there is evidence that companies are demanding more and more social skills. So any job that has a significant element of social skills is going to be very difficult to automate.
Now, you mean jobs where you interact with customers, or you're talking about intra-workplace social skills, or both?
Both of them. So social skills are going to be important for teamwork, and they're going to be very important for communicating with customers and helping customers. And in fact, one model, which again is also, I think, exaggerated, is that you're going to have a lot of back office things automated, and then you're going to have a lot of workers who are like explainers or supervisors of AI. I think that's also exaggerated, but it's certainly not crazy to think that there will be growing demand for workers with considerable social skills to be part of the production chain.
Although there are people who think, and I've found this credible based on my just fooling around with large language models, that things like customer service and tech support could be done before very long by a good bot. I mean, OpenAI only pretty recently introduced the app where you can just speak to the thing and it speaks back, and it's all audio and no text.
Right.
But it doesn't seem crazy to me that those jobs could fall fairly fast.
Well, they have. We have automated a lot of customer service jobs already.
Right.
And not with great success, I would say. A lot of automated customer service, and I admit your point that it's not using large language models at the moment, so things might change. But a lot of customer service that's automated is pretty low quality.
You mean the text chat bots that are so annoying you just never use them?
Annoying, and they cannot solve your problem.
Right.
You have to wait for actual human, and of course there are very few of them, so there are very long wait times. And some of it is also transferring the cost from the company to the customer. So you might think that self-checkout kiosks are super efficient, but what they're doing is that they're actually transferring some of the work from the workers who are helping you check out to the customer himself or herself. Now, perhaps that's okay, because some of the customers were waiting there, and you might as well get to do the work of bagging their own produce. But it's not really efficiency gains. It's just reallocating work, and customer service is a very important element of that as well.
Yeah. Well, they might argue that they're saving you time on balance because the cost of replicating the automated things, or I would say the marginal cost of continuing to use them once you've made the investment is so low, whereas the marginal cost of a worker is always the same amount per hour.
That's right. Right. The moment we have chatbots that are as versatile, as good at problem solving, as flexible, and as empathetic, because some of them actually you need empathy when you are dealing with customer service, then they can really scale up. But I don't think that's going to be anytime soon.
Yeah. So what? Well, first of all, is there anything more you want to say about jobs you expect to be the first ones threatened by the current wave of AI?
Well, yeah, I mean, routine white-collar jobs are going to be the first one. But what I would like to say is, you know, you used a sentence about 2 minutes ago, which implied something that I disagree with, and I don't know whether you meant it or not, but it's something that other people claim, which is that we are in this inexorable process in which more and more jobs are going to be automated, and there are going to be no important work left for workers, perhaps except for computer designers, software engineers, etc. And I completely reject that. I reject that as a predetermined path. If you use these technologies in the way that I was trying to suggest, in this pro-worker way, there could actually be a lot of new jobs that are created. But that's where the element of choice, element of institutions, element of the direction of technology are going to be very, very important. So I don't think we should resign ourselves to a future in which everything is going to be automated either next year or the year after next, okay, perhaps in 10 years. I think in the process, we could actually create high pay, meaningful jobs. And I think my dream would be, not it's a dream because I don't think that's the most likely path, at least unless we take action. But my dream would be that you are actually able to create better pay, better quality, more meaningful jobs for workers without college degrees, which this country has not looked after for the last 40 years.
Is there an example of how
Yeah,
that would happen?
Let me give you an example. That electricians. Okay, in this country, we have a shortage of electricians. Despite that, it's actually not a great, very well-paid job. And the solution to that is not sending more people to college. The solution to that is actually train better electricians and give them better tools for dealing with increasingly complex and rare problems that are going to get more complex as we electrify the grid, for example. So generative AI-like tools could actually be purposed for that task. So we can give electricians a very different type of generative AI tool than ChatGPT, which has domain-specific knowledge based on similar cases and helps them troubleshoot new and more complex problems, and enables them to upskill for new things related to the electricity grid or new equipment. And that would help both with the shortage of electricians and would enable electricians to earn more. It would actually boost the capabilities of mid-skill electricians. If you're like the very, very best electrician in the country, you can probably find your way around. But if I'm a middle-of-the-road electrician, then having a tool like that would enable me to do much more meaningful, complex jobs. And that's the kind of premise that I think is possible. It's not where we're going, but if we were to invest in that, we could actually reverse the trend of growing inequality, reverse the trend of stagnant wages.
So when you say it's not where we're going right now, I take that to mean that you don't think that even modestly enlightened capitalists will naturally fill that kind of niche. This would
Yeah,
require.
I think it's hard for me to answer that question because I don't know your definition of modestly enlightened capitalists, but that's not where OpenAI is going, for example. I don't know whether they fit your definition of modestly enlightened. Sam Altman talks a good talk, and I'm sure that he has some real concerns when he talks, for example, about regulating AI and making AI used for the betterment of humanity. But that's not where OpenAI is going. That's not where many of the large tech companies are going at the moment.
Well, I guess in theory, they might say that some of the things are opening up to developers and even customers, like the APIs that allow a company to use its own training data and various things. And they just unveiled this thing where you can, to some extent, customize your own bot, although that's not going to turn you into a great electrician. But I guess I guess they're or they would say that they're opening these tools up for adaptation to more specific purposes.
Absolutely, and that could create some of the tools that I'm talking about. There are many other applications we could talk about in healthcare, in education, and so on and so forth. But I have two problems with that. One is the overall business model and priorities of the big tech companies is not really going after those sorts of occupations and increasing productivity of the occupation. If you look at the OpenAI's business model, it's very similar to Facebook: grow, collect as much data and dominate the market. And that's not a conducive. It's not a business model that's conducive to let's try to develop these domain-specific expertise. Now, perhaps it is possible that somebody could take their tools and build on it, but even there, I am doubtful because, the genius and, in some sense, the failure of these foundation models is that they wanted to sound as human as possible, but it also brings a lot of problems. I think hallucinations are the tip of the iceberg. If you're trying to sound as human as possible on the basis of the current architecture, predict the next word or the next string of words in a sequence, that's not going to be a very reliable basis for giving you very specific advice. So I don't think many people would want to be operated by a chat GPT powered surgeon. So, okay, fine, electrician work is perhaps not as high stakes as surgery, but it does require very reliable information, very specific domain-specific information. And I think the current architecture may not serve that.
Hmm. Okay. Now, are there any specific government policies you already have in mind that would be useful here?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think the way that Simon and I sort of frame that is like a three-pronged approach. And we say that in other historical episodes, when you've had successful redirection of technology and restructuring of the economy, you've had equivalence of these three prongs. First of all, you need to start with the identification of the problem and changing the narrative around it. I think in the case of AI, first of all, being clear about what we want. So, for instance, I would say it's socially desirable and technically feasible to have pro-worker AI or pro-democratic AI rather than the current models, and change the narrative. It's not just about Sam Altman versus Elon Musk, but you need worker voices, civil society workers, regulation. I think that's part of a broader conversation. On the basis of that, then you need to start changing institutions and the distribution of power, building countervailing powers, as people used to say in the mid 60s and so on, James Galbraith's term. And then once you have this countervailing powers and a clear-eyed set of, not a consensus, but a sort of broad discussion on where we might want to go, then you start designing specific policies. And I think those specific policies would have to, target current distorted parts of the landscape, and you try to undo them. And then you try to identify places where, externalities are not internalized or there are better options, and then you try to encourage them. So, for instance, in the area of energy, you have to use carbon taxes because that's the clear place where, oil and gas and coal are creating a tremendously clear damage. So you try to tax that to discourage it, but it's not enough. We would not have generated the tremendous advances in solar and wind technology with just carbon taxes. We also needed to put a lot of money in innovation. So the government support for innovation in renewables was an important part of it. So we have, Simon and I have a series of proposals that go in that direction. For example, get rid of the distortions in the tax system in the US, which favor capital ahead of labor and creates a bias towards automation. Find ways of governments, just like the same way that the government does in the case of renewables or the National Institutes of Health, government funding for more socially beneficial technologies. But there are also other things that I think are very interesting to think about. AI is unimaginable without data, and data is going to become more and more important. But so that you should think of data as just like labor and capital as a factor of production. But we compensate labor, sometimes not enough, but we compensate labor. We compensate capital very well, thank you. But data is out there to be expropriated by large tech companies. So we should find ways of, having data providers get some of the gains, but also in the process encourage higher quality data. So some sort of data ownership, and that's not going to be private ownership because that wouldn't work for a variety of reasons. So some sort of collective data ownership may be necessary. And that's actually a legislative and government problem because those kind of markets are not going to emerge by themselves.
Yeah, and to show you how far we are from that, right now the companies aren't even compelled to tell us what data they trained on. There isn't even transparency, much less compensate the people who have a claim to having created the data, which itself is going to be a super complicated problem, right? Because you're probably going to need a certain kind of collective bargaining in a sense, because they have a lot of alternative sources, different newspapers they can use, different social media platforms, different
Absolutely.
Substack newsletters to raise a subject dear to my own heart. So it's going to be so it's certainly not going to be. Although the energy example is illustrative in terms of principle, that's a much simpler regulatory challenge, right?
Absolutely. Yes, this is a harder one. But then again, I would say in the 60s, when people first started understanding the pollution and carbon emissions problem, the energy problem was very challenging. I mean, it took us, 50 years until sufficient investment started going into renewables.
Thanks for watching Nonzero Clips. To hear more of this conversation and others like it, subscribe to the Nonzero YouTube channel or the Nonzero podcast feed. And to gain access to exclusive podcast content, subscribe to Robert Wright's Nonzero newsletter on Substack.